Acknowledging with bare attention whatever thoughts arise in the mind does not mean modifying the mind in some way, such as by trying to imprison thought or to block its flow. It is difficult to do this without distraction for a long time, especially for someone who is beginning this practice as a result of strong mental habits of distraction acquired through transmigration in the course of unlimited time. If we only take into consideration this present lifetime, from the moment of our birth right up until the present, we have done nothing other than live distractedly, and there has never been an opportunity to train in the presence of awareness and non-distraction. For this reason, until we become no longer capable of entering into distraction, if, through lack of attention, we find ourselves becoming dominated by neglectfulness and forgetfulness, we must try by every means to become aware of what is happening through relying on the presence of mind. There is no meditation that you can find beyond this. Continuing in one's own true condition with the presence of the calm state or with the moving wave of thought. Beyond recognition with bare attention and continuing in one's own state, there is nothing to seek that is either very good or very dear. If one hopes that something will manifest from outside oneself, instead of continuing in the presence of one's own state, this is like the saying that tells about an evil spirit coming to the eastern gate and the ransom to buy him off being sent to the western gate. In such a case, even if one believes one is meditating perfectly, in reality, it's just a way of tiring oneself out for nothing. So continuing in the state which one finds within oneself is really the most important thing. If one neglects that which one has within oneself and instead seeks something else, one becomes like the beggar who had a precious stone for a pillow, but not knowing what it was for, had to go to such great pains to beg for alms for a living. Therefore, maintaining the presence of one's own state and observing the wave of thought, without judging whether this presence is more or less clear, and without thinking of the calm state and the wave of thought in terms of the acceptance of the one and the rejection of the other. Absolutely not conditioned by wanting to change anything whatsoever, one continues without becoming distracted and without forgetting to keep one's awareness present. Governing oneself in this way, one gathers the essence of the practice. Some people are disturbed when they hear noises made by other people, walking, talking, and so on. And they become irritated by this, or else becoming distracted by things external to themselves. They give birth to many illusions. This is the mistaken path known as the dangerous passageway, in which external vision appears to one as an enemy. What this means is that even though one knows how to continue in the knowledge of the condition of both the state of calm and the wave of thought, one has not yet succeeded in integrating this state with one's external vision. If this should be the case, while still always maintaining present awareness, if one sees something, one should not be distracted, but without judging what one sees as pleasant, one should relax and continue in the presence. If a thought arises judging experience as pleasant and unpleasant, one should just acknowledge it with bare attention and continue in present awareness without forgetting it. If one finds oneself in an annoying circumstance, such as surrounded by a terrible row, one should just acknowledge this disagreeable circumstance and continue in present awareness without forgetting it. If one does not know how to integrate the presence of awareness with all one's daily actions, such as eating, walking, sleeping, sitting, and so on, then it is not possible to make the state of contemplation last beyond the limited duration of a session of sitting meditation. If this is so, not having been able to establish true present awareness, one creates a separation between one's sessions of sitting practice and one's daily life. So it is very important to continue in present awareness without distraction, integrating it with all the actions of one's daily life. The Buddha, in the Prajnaparamita Sutra, said, Subhuti, in what way does a bodhisattva, mahasattva, being aware that he has a body, practice perfect conduct? Subhuti, a bodhisattva, mahasattva, when walking, is fully mindful that he is walking. When he stands up, is fully mindful of standing up. When sitting, is fully mindful of sitting. When sleeping, is fully mindful of sleeping. And if his body is well or ill, he is fully mindful of either condition. That's just how it is. To understand how one can integrate present awareness with all the activities of one's daily life, let's take the example of walking. There's no need to jump up immediately and walk in a distracted and agitated way, marching up and down and breaking everything one finds in front of one as soon as the idea of walking arises. Rather, as one gets up, one can do so remembering, now I am getting up, and while walking, I do not want to become distracted. In this way, without becoming distracted, step by step, one should govern oneself with the presence of awareness. In the same way, if one remains seated, one should not forget this awareness. And whether one is eating a very tasty morsel, or having a drop to drink, or saying a couple of words, whatever action one undertakes, whether it is of greater or lesser importance, one should continue with present awareness of everything without becoming distracted. Since we are so strongly habituated to distraction, it is difficult to give birth to this presence of awareness. And this is especially true for those who are just beginning to practice. But whenever there's any new kind of work to be done, the first thing one has to do is to learn it. And even if at the first few attempts one is not very practiced, with experience, little by little, the work becomes easy. In the same way, in learning contemplation, at the beginning one needs commitment and a definite concern not to become distracted. Following that, one must maintain present awareness as much as possible. And finally, if one becomes distracted, one must notice it. If one perseveres in one's commitment to maintaining present awareness, it is possible to arrive at a point where one no longer ever becomes distracted. In general, in Dzogchen, the teaching of spontaneous self-perfection, one speaks of the self-liberation of the way of seeing, of the way of meditating, of the way of behaving, and of the fruit. But this self-liberation must arrive through the presence of awareness. In particular, the self-liberation of the way of behaving cannot arise if it is not based on the presence of awareness. So if one does not succeed in making the self-liberation of one's way of behaving precise, one cannot overcome the distinction between sessions of sitting meditation and one's daily life. When we speak of the self-liberation of one's way of behaving as a fundamental principle of all the tantras, the agama, and the upadesa of Dzogchen, this pleases the young people of today a great deal. But some of them do not know that the real basis of self-liberation is the presence of awareness. And many of them, even if they understand this a little in theory and know how to speak of it, nevertheless have the defect of not applying it. If a sick person knows perfectly well the properties and functions of a medicine, and is also expert in giving explanations about it, but doesn't even take the medicine, they can never get well. In the same way, throughout limitless time, we have been suffering from the serious illness of being subject to the dualistic condition. And the only remedy from this illness is real knowledge of the state of self-liberation without falling into limitations. When one is in contemplation, in the continuation of the awareness of the true state, then it is not necessary to consider one's way of behaving as important. But on the other hand, for someone who is beginning to practice, there is no way of entering into practice other than by alternating sessions of sitting meditation with one's daily life. This is because we have such strong attachment based on logical thinking, on regarding the objects of our senses as being concrete, and even more so based on our material body made of flesh and blood. When we meditate on the absence of self-nature, examining mentally our head and the limbs of our body, eliminating them one by one as without self, we can finally arrive at establishing that there is no self or I. But this absence of self-nature remains nothing but a piece of knowledge arrived at through intellectual analysis. And there is as yet no real knowledge of this absence of self-nature. Because while we are cozily talking about this absence of self-nature, if it should happen that we get a thorn in our foot, there's no doubt that we'll right away be yelping, "Ow, ow." This shows that we are still subject to the dualistic condition, and that the absence of self-nature, so loudly proclaimed with our mouth, has not become a real lived state for us. For this reason, it is indispensable to regard as extremely important the presence of awareness, which is the basis of self-liberation in one's daily conduct. Since there have been different ways of regarding conduct as important, there have arisen various forms of rules established according to the external conditions prevailing at the time, such as religious rules and judicial laws. There is, however, a great deal of difference between observing rules through compulsion and observing them through awareness. Since in general, everyone is conditioned by karma, by the passions, and by dualism, there are very few people who observe rules and laws through awareness. For this reason, even if they don't want to do so, human beings have had to remain subject to the power of various kinds of rules and laws. We are already conditioned by karma, by the passions, and by dualism. If one then adds limitations derived from having compulsorily to follow rules and laws, our burden becomes even heavier. And without doubt, we get even further from the correct way of seeing and from the right way of behaving. However, if one understands the term self-liberating as meaning that one can do whatever one wants, This is not correct. This is absolutely not what the principle of self-liberation means. And to believe such a mistaken view would show that one has not truly understood what awareness means. But then again, we should not consider the principle of laws and rules as being just the same as the principle of awareness. Laws and rules are in fact established on the basis of circumstances, of time and place, and work by conditioning the individual with factors outside him or herself. Awareness, on the other hand, arises from a state of knowledge which the individual themselves possesses. Because of this, laws and rules sometimes correspond to the inherent awareness of the individual, and sometimes do not. However, if one has awareness, it is possible to overcome the situation of being bound by compulsion to follow rules and laws. Not only is this so, but an individual who has awareness and keeps it stably present is also capable of living in peace under all the rules and laws there are in the world, without being in any way conditioned by them. Many masters have said, "Urge on the horse of awareness with the whip of presence." And in fact, if awareness is not quickened by presence, it cannot function. Let's examine an example of awareness. Suppose that in front of a person in a normal condition there is a cup full of poison, and that person is aware of what it is. Adult and balanced persons, knowing the poison for what it is and aware of the consequences of taking it, do not need much clarification about it. But they have to warn those who don't know about the poison being there by saying something like, "In this cup there is some poison, and it's deadly if swallowed." Thus, by creating awareness in others, the danger can be avoided. This is what we mean by awareness. But there are cases of persons who, although they know the danger of the poison, don't give any importance to it, or still have doubts as to whether it really is a dangerous poison, or who really lack all awareness. And with these people, it is simply not sufficient to just say, "This is poison." For them, one has to say, "It is forbidden to drink this substance on pain of punishment by the law." And through this kind of threat, the law protects the lives of these individuals. This is the principle on which laws are based. And even if it is very different from the principle of awareness, it is nevertheless indispensable as a means to save the lives of those who are unconscious and without awareness. Now we can continue the metaphor of the poison to show what we mean by presence. If the person who has a cup of poison in front of them, even though they are aware and know very well what the consequences of taking the poison would be, does not have a continuous presence of attention to the fact that the cup contains poison. It may happen that they become distracted and swallow some of it. So if awareness is not continually accompanied by presence, it is difficult for there to be the right result. This is what we mean by presence. In Mahayana Buddhism, the principle to which maximum importance is given, and the essence itself of the Mahayana doctrine, is the union of voidness and compassion. But in truth, if one does not have awareness inseparably linked to presence, there absolutely cannot arise a really genuine compassion. As long as one does not have the real experience of being moved by compassion for others, it is useless to pretend that one is so very full of compassion. There is a Tibetan proverb about this which says, even if you've got eyes to see other people, you need a mirror to see yourself. As this proverb implies, if one really wants a genuine compassion for others to arise in oneself, it is necessary to observe one's own defects, be aware of them, and mentally put yourself in other people's places to really discover what those persons' actual conditions might be. The only way to succeed in this is to have the presence of awareness. Otherwise, even if one pretends to have great compassion, a situation will sooner or later arise which shows that compassion has never really been born in us at all. Until a pure compassion does arise, there is no way to overcome one's limits and barriers. And it happens that many practitioners, as they progress in the practice, just end up thinking of themselves as being a divinity and thinking of everyone else as being evil spirits. Thus they are doing nothing other than increasing their own limits, developing attachment towards themselves and hatred towards others. Or even if they talk a great deal about Mahamudra and Dzogchen, all they are really doing is becoming more expert and refined in the ways of behaving of the 8 worldly dharmas. This is a sure sign that a true compassion has not arisen in us. And the root of the matter is that there has never really arisen the presence of awareness. So, without chattering about it, or getting caught up in trying to hide behind an elegant facade, one should try really and truly to cause the presence of awareness actually to arise in oneself, and then carry it into practice. This is the most important point of the practice of Dzogchen.